In Chapter 28, the fundamental question that we were addressing is, what is the state of the economy? And we referred to that in terms of either a positive or a negative GDP gap, which is the same as saying either a period of economic expansion in the terms of a positive GDP gap, or economic contraction and recession in the event of a negative GDP gap. And we looked at how you can identify those gaps by a comparison of where the real GDP is in relationship to the calculated or trend GDP. In Chapter 30, we go to what Keynes had as the basis of his approach to handling the economy. What is the appropriate government reaction or response? This presumes that government has a role in adjusting, correcting, or manipulating the economy, and so there are tools under fiscal policy that the government can use to respond to either a positive GDP gap or a negative GDP gap to keep it in line with the trend or the calculated value where productivity should be at naturally. We typically think of a positive GDP gap or a period of economic expansion as a positive thing, as a good thing. Productivity is high. The households have a lot of additional income and are able to consume more and should be able to save more. Oftentimes we as consumers tend to spend as much as we have, but we're flush with cash, if you will. Both households and businesses are flush with cash. Businesses are able to sell through their planned inventories, and investment is going strong as well. We think of this as a positive situation, but if it is in excess or well above of the level of natural productivity where the economy should be at, we're using more resources and are moving into an area of resource shortage. So if we are overusing our available resources and we're moving towards a shortage, what is naturally going to happen? The economy is going to have to pull back. So if we don't want to continue to overuse resources, we don't want to operate in an economic bubble of excessive growth for too long. That's where the term overheating comes from. In the years prior to the Great Recession, the term overheating was used in the news and media quite often to suggest that the economy was pushing too far too fast. And so there are some specific actions that the government can take in order to prevent overheating. And we're going to take a look at what those tools are. The toolbox of fiscal policy includes two tools: government spending and taxes. Government spending, as one of the aggregate expenditures, CIG and net exports, also has the benefit of the multiplier effect. Taxes, on the other hand, as a leakage, should not be calculated with a multiplier effect at all. In this case, where we are looking at a positive GDP gap, the economy is overheating. It's using resources at a faster pace than it can sustain. There's a potential for a shortage of resources, which would naturally force a contraction. in response to a positive GDP gap, a government, as part of their fiscal policy, may choose to decrease government spending or increase taxes. Now, decreasing government spending, of course, reduces the amount of money going into the economy by the government, and so that decrease would also have a multiplier effect assessed as part of that. Taxes, on the other hand, an increase in taxes will reduce consumption and would not have a multiplier effect assessed on it. We started off this particular scenario with a positive GDP gap, an expanding economy that is possibly overheating as well, using an excess of resources and moving towards a shortage. Because the government's objective with this fiscal policy is to rein in the economy, that is, to pull it back to a lower level of GDP, of productivity, it is referred to as a contractionary fiscal policy. So if the government is decreasing spending or increasing its taxes, then we would say that the government fiscal policy is contractionary. In this case, in this scenario, the economy is in a negative GDP gap in which the economy is in a recession, in or near a recession. We have decreasing levels of consumption and decreasing levels of productivity in the business sectors, and so we have to decide what is the appropriate fiscal policy response from the government in this case of a negative GDP gap. In the case of a negative GDP gap, that is, the economy is in or near recession, the fiscal policy response is the exact opposite of a contractionary policy. The response is to increase government spending and to decrease taxes. With increased government spending, we're obviously directly increasing aggregate expenditures, which has a multiplier effect assessed to it, or we are decreasing taxes, and therefore giving more money back into the pockets of consumers to increase consumption as well. In this scenario, the objective is to move the economy to the right as far as productivity, that is, to increase gross domestic product. And the fiscal policy of increased government spending and or decreased taxes is undertaken in order to promote this expansion of gross domestic product. Therefore, obviously, this fiscal policy is described as an expansionary fiscal policy. In the next presentation, Fiscal Policy 2, we'll discuss government spending and where does the money come from. It would seem that the money would obviously come from taxes, but there are actually a couple of different options as far as where the government gets the money that it spends within the economy.